Brains are hardwired to learn things because you'll
Mm,
die if you learn nothing. You literally will die. If you don't learn how to cross a street, you'll die. So the ABCs for being motivated and learning, I say one, arousal's just are you sharp, alert, good to go? And that's usually getting their attention, moving their body, just get them alert. The second thing is B for buy-in. If you don't get them to believe you, to care about it, and to get pulled into the topic, you're skating on thin ice. The third one
mm.
is C, which is for curiosity. Curiosity is kind of the long haul, like where is this going? How will this help me out?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Movement and Performance Podcast, where it is my goal to help people get active, connect with their body, and perform better. In this episode, I'm joined by Eric Jensen to unpack how the brain really learns. If you care about helping others learn and grow, or if you want some strategies to improve your own learning journey, this episode's for you. Without further ado, let's get right into it. To start off the conversation, I'm just, curious, pretty much how does the brain learn, or how do people learn in a very general sense?
Boy, I wish that one was an easy question. The answer
Yeah.
is that our brain is designed to run our bodies, like keep you alive, just to survive. So over generations, your brain has figured out at least a half dozen different ways to learn. As an example, imitation learning is a way to learn. You don't need to be in a classroom. You could just kids see other kids on a playground and they imitate the learning. It could be associative learning where kids just link two things together and go, oh, that's what they're doing. And they can figure it out. And it could be mindfulness, practicing inside your head. I learned from this and now I can do that. It could be what you'd call explicit or declarative learning, where someone is talking to you, or you're reading a book, or you're outside hearing the rules. That's a different way to learn. And obviously, procedural learning. People learn with their bodies how to do things. And so you could go on, but your body, in order to keep you alive, has all these different ways. They seem like loose ends, but when you put them all together, you go, wow, there's a lot I can do.
All right, so how the brain learns, you mentioned some great pieces there. I noticed in your book it mentioned the big five players. Uh, what are the big five players when it comes to learning?
One of the first big players is where is the kid coming from? Meaning, what's their
Mm,
cognitive and emotional and social history? Because that's going to influence how they want to learn something, or their level of learning, or their background knowledge. So knowing a student's past and present skill sets is always a player in learning, no matter
mm,
what else you're trying to do. A second one is, can you build or evoke relevance and a big why? Like, why are we doing this? And
mm.
when you can, you're going to activate real core important neurotransmitters that put your brain on alert to stay locked in when there's a strong relevance. It could also be degree of difficulty as an example of a player, meaning if it's too easy, kids just laugh it off and think that's silly. And if it's too
Mm,
hard, they go, well, this is dumb. I don't even know where to start. Like you have to find sweet spots. And that
mm,
usually comes from either prior knowledge or observation and watching where your students are at. So you can start off, where is the lowest end at which kids can say, I can do this, but not over the top to where very few can. So good teaching always finds this sweet spot. And that sweet spot means I'm getting it, I'm getting it. And in order for it to make that continue, you'll need to double back, repeat it in different words, or using gestures the next time, or using visuals the next time. Like you'll need to keep lapping your learning. And that's another sort of a player in it. Another big player is time. So
mm.
when teachers go too fast, too slow, or if they don't put in breaks, if they don't allow students time to process it, there's all kinds of data on why you should do this. But in general, kids do best when they get a break after a short bit of learning. That break could
Mm,
be moving around the room, a classroom. The break could be quiet time, or it could be if it's in secondary that they're going out and passing between classes. So
mm.
time is a core feature of the learning process. And another one is are we getting any feedback? And if we're getting feedback, is there enough clarity to it and enough meaning to it for it to feel useful for us? Meaning, when it's done well, it's a reward.
Mm.
So feedback is a crucial piece of it. So I'm only putting on my hat of, if I was talking to a classroom teacher, what would I do? But you could put on different hats and come up with a different five players. And I'm wondering if there's a couple you were thinking of that you thought were pretty important to be on the list, because I think the list could get pretty long.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the list could probably be endless. I think you hit a lot of big ones there. When I think about learning, I usually tell people in physical education, because that's my background, that, there's the physical side, which is your content, but then the education side is how you deliver that content. And you're talking about your two separate majors. So meaning like the art and science of learning and delivering instruction is completely separate from your content. And based on what you're saying, like there's a whole art to this, to be able to do it, I think, effectively, and to, teach in a way that is beneficial for how our brains are wired, you
Yep,
know?
that's it. I mean, you got it. And
Yeah.
I'm often asked about where does the brain kind of, where in the brain this happens.
Right.
20, 30 years ago, people were pretty sure there were motor systems, there were procedural things, and then there were cognitive things. And we can throw a lot of that away. Why is
Mm,
that? Because the more we've learned about the brain in the last few years, the more we've learned uh, how interconnected it is and how much more complicated it is. So, just one way to think about how we could learn would be to say, okay, we learn through our senses, our five senses, the
mm,
senses, of sight and sound and touch and so forth. But the second core discovery that's been pretty big in the last few years is the other half of our sensory system, and that's the sensory system called interoception. And so,
mm,
external perception of senses is a way we take in things. Like, I felt this hit my arm. The ball hit me in the leg. I mean, that's an example of a sense, and we saw it, we heard it, we felt it. But there's a whole nother set, another half of signals that your brain uses. This one is called interoception. And what that does, that's an internal group of your body's signaling systems. Examples would be your blood pressure, your glucose levels, your stress levels, your hunger levels, and immediate urges that you might have. And we notice those all day long, but we don't really categorize them. We just go, oh, I just got so hungry, I just had to eat. So that's an urge. Or
mm,
someone says, my blood pressure's low, I need some glucose or something. Those things actually have a third part to them, which is a system that lets those two talk with the outside. So you've
mm.
got inside five of these interoceptions, including, as I said, hunger, urges, glucose levels, stress levels, blood pressure. You've got all of those on the internal side that people only tell you about when you get your blood drawn. And then you've
Right.
got all the outside senses, but people forget that those two are exquisitely connected to each other. And
Mm,
so when you want kids to be at top learning states, in good shape for learning, you got to remember that for some of those, hunger's in the way, for some of those, stress is in the way, for some of those, their glucose levels are so low, and so you might get them up out of their seat and just do something like a marching in place or moving in place just to start bumping up some of that. What I'm saying is
mm,
is that this system that you and I call our brain that learns things, it's taking in so much data, it has to organize it by this set of teams of five external systems and then internal. So those two groups together coordinate your how you survive. And so
mm,
it's a bit messier and it's a bit more complicated, but the good news is that it helps us give credibility to what's going on inside. Like when someone says, that doesn't feel right to me, that's a gut
Mm.
feeling. And the gut feeling is running on a different system than the outer bit of information, the outer screens and sounds and all that. And other people they can't process what's inside of
Mm.
so you have to
Mm.
keep telling them this is what's going on inside of you. So the short answer to that is it's pretty messy.
Yeah. 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 So it sounds to me like learning potential based on the fact that these senses play a big role. Do you think that, learning should be more of an experience rather than sitting in a chair and being told? Like, so based on like heightening those senses, whether it's the five senses or inside my body, like getting these things moving, do you think there's some benefit to creating experiences that enhance these senses a bit?
There's got to be a blend about it. And when I say this a blend, it's because when somebody really knows something well, they
Mm.
not only can say it, but they could draw you a picture. If
Mm.
they can't draw you a picture for a first grader, then they don't really know it very well.
Mm.
And if they know it well, they could explain something that's technical. Like Nobel laureate Richard Feynman would always say, if you can explain what you know to a first grader, then I'd say you got the gist of it. But a lot of teachers
Mm.
can't explain that. And that's a problem. It means they don't really know it. So the short answer is yes. I would, if at all possible, steep them into step by step an experience of doing something. And then they can have a discussion about it. Then they can start saying, let me map that out, mind map it. And then let's go do it again and see if we can improve on it.
Mm.
There's so many ways that we could do better at it.
Mm. Mm.
And it's learning's a lot more messy,
Mm-hmm.
than we wish it was. And 50 or 100 years ago, most kids didn't experience the same things that they are going through today. As an example, social media exerts a lot of influence on kids. So then they come
Mm.
to class and we're dealing with somebody that may already have some some trauma that's been nested in them
Mm.
because of that.
So would you say that learning is also directly tied to like survival?
Easily,
Based,
easily.
yeah.
If you went back 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 years, only the humanoids, the clans that moved around that were able to learn from mistakes and to be able to learn not just to avoid this poison or that, but to learn how to make more sophisticated tools or learn how to move towards warmer weather during a winter or to learn how to organize a way for us to get food on an ongoing basis. Like they didn't even learn about growing food till 10,000 years ago. But once
Right.
they learned that, it opened up a lot of doors. So learning is a survival tool. And in
Mm.
today's world, I'd say that if you are not a, a pretty robust learner, then you'll pretty much be passed by the rest of the
Mm.
world. Like example would be things like cryptos. People thought those were a joke for a long time. Who knows whether they'll be a trend and go out? But for the moment, people are starting to consider them a little bit more seriously, as in you want to know enough about them to make
Mm.
decisions about them. So when we take it to physical education, what we've learned now is that people who are more physical and who get out and exercise more, their longevity increases. We'll get
Mm.
into that a little bit later, but I know you have more questions.
Right. Yeah. I think that's well said. Um, so do you think when we're considering whether it's teaching kids or even teaching ourselves, motivation has to play a big part of that? And I think getting to know the kid and what motivates them and is going to be an extremely important tool. It almost seems like trying to force them to learn something they don't want to learn almost seems kind of meaningless because it's not going to be valued by them anyway.
Absolutely. I think what I learned as a teacher And what I've learned that as a trainer is a lot of times when I want to start up something that maybe is a little more intense, sometimes I'll just take a little sidestep and I'll say, just before we start, let's try out something that I've found with other students to help them learn more quickly. And
Mm,
they'll say, let's do an experiment just for a moment. I'll say, please stand up. And I'll ask them to do something. And once I get a few of the leaders doing, everybody's doing it in the class.
mm,
And that might be things like slow breaths. Like I want people to be locked in and alert. So one way to do that might be just 20 short breaths, or it could be an inhale and then an exhale, things like that. What you're after is you're after not just oxygenating their body if you want them to learn, but you're also off after them to do something else, which is really crucial. And that is, I want them to be thinking of what are we going to do? What's this going to get? What are we going to get? And that wanting that you're doing is raising dopamine levels. And
mm,
dopamine is a crucial neurotransmitter in your brain to increase learning. So we're going after focus, we're going after dopamine levels, we're going after oxygenation, we're going after just short repetitions where we give them small bites of learning and then I'll let them pause and interact. We're also going to make sure that they get the attitude going into learning of embracing errors. What most
mm,
research of the last 15 years has told us is that your ideal is about a 15% error rate, meaning that's the
mm,
Goldilocks for learning. If
mm,
kids are getting 70% wrong, that's going to get them pretty depressed and they're going to quit. But if they can get
mm.
85% right and work with the 15%, they can constantly take on mistakes, 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 and get better and better and better. Now, you and I know that's delicate to do. However,
Mm,
you can arrange that. When I start up a training and I'm doing professional development, I, for years, would open it up with, after we just introduce the day, I say, right before we start, let's get a little bit of background knowledge, find out where you're at. I'll give them 10 or 15 true false and put that up
mm,
on the screen. And maybe it's about the brain and how, just so I know their background. And I ask them to go through that work by themselves. And then I'll go back and walk through. Usually I'll have a neighbor grade their test just because it's more fun that way. It feels more like they're back in school.
right.
And then I'll ask how many got, you know, 90% or more correct, not many hands go up. How many got most of them correct? And you'll see the bulk of the hands go up. But if I see only half of the hands go up, then that tells me, oops, I made my quiz too hard. Why?
Mm,
I want them to be hungry.
mm,
So I have devised over time quizzes that I can get 85% of them right at the get-go, and now they're motivated to learn. Like it could
mm,
be, this is a true, this statement about the brain, true or false, and if they get it wrong, now they're like, dang it, how did I get that wrong? What is the end?
right.
So
So that's
that's
interesting.
part of it is creating this thirst. As you know, dopamine is about wanting. Like I
Mm,
want to get the answer. I want to get to the next one. And when you see kids that are like this and they're leaning back in their chair, you can tell the dopamine's gone.
mm,
Now, what's kicked in their body is serotonin, which says, I got it.
mm,
I not only finished the work you gave me, but I'm already on vacation. That's
right.
that's what the serotonin's telling you. And so when I go back up to that student close by, I'll say, wow, it looks like you got a pretty good start on this. I noticed there were just a couple missing. I found that with most students, sometimes just a break away from something for a minute or so, your mind gets a rest that when you come back, you see and read it differently. And sometimes you get an answer that pops in your head. So
Mm,
these three, I want you to give them one more run at it, and I'll be back in about 90 seconds. I wouldn't be surprised if you got all three of those.
mm,
Then I walk away. Notice the kid might have had 10 blanks on there. Why would I not ask him to do 10? I already asked him to do 20 and he
mm,
left 10 blank. Why would I go tell him the same thing? Am I just dumb, slow, and stupid? Nope. I go up
mm,
to him and I look for a Goldilocks. Like, what are three things?
mm,
And I gave him the why. Why? Because your brain needs a break. See it the second time and you go, oh, I get it. So when it comes to
mm,
the learning process, you want to get focus, bump up dopamine. You want to have a strong why. You just back up every few seconds just for a quick review. Sometimes a pause does the work. Kids will just pause for a second and go, huh, okay. And then you make sure that they embrace errors. Once you get them to do that, now you're starting to get your learning to move a lot quicker and things go forward. So when you bring up about learning process, just remind everyone you work with that of the ABCs. Brains are hardwired to learn things because you'll die if you learn nothing. You literally will die. If you don't learn how to cross a street, you'll die, or learn how to drive a car correctly, you'll die. So the ABCs for being motivated and learning, I say one, arousal's just are you sharp, alert, good to go? And that's usually getting their attention, moving their body, just get them alert. The second thing is B for buy-in. If you don't get them to believe you, to care about it, and to get pulled into the topic, you're skating on thin ice. The third one is C, which is for curiosity. Curiosity is kind of the long haul, like where is this going? How will this help me out? Or he said that learning this would help me learn that, and that. That would be cool. So I'm going to go after the ABCs every single time, but never all at once because it's just a little too overwhelming. I sprinkle those in the first 15, 20 minutes every time I start presenting. So with those ABCs, I got a better shot at people staying with me.
Yeah. So it sounds almost like a two-prong approach. You can think about what might, on an individual side, motivate a kid, but it also sounds like you can artificially kind of create some of these things, like when like you're saying, you're getting them moving, or you're manipulating their environment, or how you're delivering the questions, or knowing how many they're going to get wrong, but you're almost artificially creating this environment that can help stimulate the motivation as well.
You just
Yeah.
nailed it. That's the difference between teachers who struggle and teachers who have a great day almost every day. And that is that what some would say on the outside, they'll say, well, I don't know how to do that, or kids are going to give me pushback, or they won't like this. The teachers that are just flat out amazing and do a great job every day, what happens for them is they've learned how to make small nudges, both physical and declarative, small requests that kids can go along with. They've learned how to get kids connected, just small, and then they kick it up, they kick it up, they kick it up. They build trust. So the next day, they start with a little review and then they go a little bit further. By the end of the first week, kids they're just loving their teacher. And it wasn't conscious at all for them. In other words, when they ask kids, please stand up, every kid is up because they did the work to get them ready. Like there are things that kids have to have happen inside their brain or they're not going to go very far at all, such as, can I trust my teacher? Can I trust those around it? Is it a safe environment to be in? Is it worthwhile for me? Like if you don't get all of those boxes mentally checked off for kids, you're going to have a long semester or a long school year because in the first week, your top teachers have all those nailed down. They're like four big questions that kids need answered. And if not, I remember taking classes when I was in school where halfway through the semester, I couldn't have answered that fourth question, which is, whose side is my teacher on? Is he an ally or adversary? Like I could never tell. And your top teachers will let you know day one, I got your back. I will not let you fail. Like when
And
kids
kids
hear
won't learn
that,
from an adversary.
absolutely. When they see that you got their back, there are kids that just drop their jaws like, whoa, I have never had a teacher say that to me. Like in all my years in school, I got your back. I won't let you fail. That kind of stuff, just be overt and explicit about it. And the kids suddenly are different. They just, wow, my teachers just,
Why
I
do
like
why do you
you.
think why do you think that's the case? That they would But I mean, it makes complete sense, but can you pinpoint any reason maybe why?
Well, there are some core things that are under that. Like, for example, kids have had their hopes dashed many times, many times, many times, so they give up. So, unless you can provide hope for them, like, I got your back, then
Mm,
they aren't going to invest in it because it's not a good return. So, remember, this is
mm,
all about how much energy am I going to expend, whether I'm playing a sport for a team or whether I'm in a classroom with an assignment. I'm not going to put a lot of effort into this if the chances of me succeeding are low. So you have
mm,
to give them hope. Like an example of hope would be if I share with teachers, here's a school that I went to and I spent most of the day on working on just two things, movement and hope. And here's how that school did
mm.
the next school year. Trust me, I'm not taking credit for it. The staff did the work, but you can
Right,
see how important hope is.
right, right. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
And
So,
political candidates, if they're good, they keep giving you dreams like, I'm going to do this for the country, I'm going to do that for it, as opposed to, well, I don't know.
right,
That's probably not very likely to happen. People
right,
need hope.
right. Yeah, that's a very good point. So, just touching a little bit more on physical activity, uh, do you think that it's valuable? I know you already mentioned about you kind of get kids up and moving, or, you know, is physical movement valuable for the learning process? And then how do you kind of embed it in there?
Well, first of all, schools have going against them. Uh, they've got some constraints, and every school will give you this if you go to them as a new school and they don't have much of physical education. They're going to tell you things like, we don't have the resources. Resources
Mm,
meaning a place for kids to do that. We don't have any things like balls, bats,
mm-hmm,
rope, all those things. They'll say, we don't have that. So the first thing is that people who don't have hope, they start from a mentality, a mindset of, we're victims, we don't have anything. In other
mm,
words, people that are gung ho will go out and find that. They'll raise money from people in their class, from parents in their classroom. They'll raise money from the community. They'll buy stuff on their own. In other words, teachers that just say, I will not let my kids fail. Those are the ones that buy a jump rope for kids to use in a classroom.
mm,
So the first problem when you're trying to implement something like that is people are going to give you a lot of riffraff. The second is how-to stuff. So when you go out to a school, you're giving them the how-to, like give them examples of what they can do. So I look in the research for the how-tos. What are simple things
mm,
that kids can do? So the studies that have been done the most on physical activity and the results in the classroom are things that are measurable. Because if you can't measure it, then it's hard to compare it, like start at the beginning of the school year and at the end of the school year, those things.
mm,
So one school that I went out and got them so excited about physical education, the teachers in this school, and it was in, I think, a North Carolina school, they decided they're going to take their kids out on a 15-minute walk for recess. Like
mm,
most of the year, the weather's decent in North Carolina. So they go out, take a 15-minute walk. And at the beginning, the kids were kind of grumpy about it and all that. And at the end of the walk, you could tell they're a little bit better at it. And they got back in the classroom each day, a little bit better, a little bit better. And then the next thing you knew it, the kids were saying, that's all? Can we go any further? So they set up a
mm,
separate time after school if kids wanted to go further and they could walk around. They're a big place where they could take laps. By the end of the school year, every class was going was taking longer laps after school, and then this school put up a challenge to other schools in the district, and the next thing you know, kids all over the district were competing just for fun. You didn't win anything, you're just competing. Kids were doing something like walking 50 miles while they're going to school. Insane.
wow.
And the good thing is their hope went up, their durability in the classroom, ability to stay focused in the classroom. They were able to stay on task more in the classroom. The bad behaviors disappeared. Like a lot
Mm.
of stuff happens when kids are out on long walks. So, so one way was to measure walks. Another way is to give them a specific activity. And these have been studied a lot. You've heard of these before. And the ones I'll see if I can find, I brought some notes on it when I was looking down just for a second.
Yeah,
Um,
no worries.
yeah, there's all kinds of ones that just had a whole lot of data on them. And some
Mm.
of the ones that were easiest to study. And that was when teachers would do the head and toes, knees and shoulders. So that
Mm.
particular standing in place sounds pretty easy. But in the beginning, especially for young kids, it's really hard for first graders to learn that. But after a while, they do. And
Mm.
kids who are in fourth grade can do that fairly quickly, but then, of course, you can speed it up. Why is this a big deal? This has been studied compared to control groups all over the world, and several studies have shown that it led to a variety of classroom outcomes, including readiness for school. They did this during the summertime. It predicted growth in mathematics. It also predicted cognitive flexibility, working memory skills, inhibitory control so they could stop when they needed to stop and start when they needed to, more flexibility. This also happened when they did things such as jump rope, hopscotch, all of the games that you and I remember when we were little kids, that it's hard to find those anymore. So
Mm.
another way to get kids to do things would be through creative arts. In
Mm.
creative arts, you'd think, okay, that means painting or something, but this was Headspace. And there were two high schools used in this study, and the two high schools each had about 150 kids. They were randomly selected, and one of them was the control group, and the other one took one class a week that was incredibly hard, difficult creative class. And
Mm.
here's what the creative class did. Every single 50-minute class that they took once a week, the teacher started them off with a nearly impossible task. And they said, I'm going to tell you what the problem is, or you can read the problem, and your job is for the rest of class to figure out how to solve it. The
Mm.
first example, and he did one of these every single week of the semester, these high school kids. So the first one, I'll just read you the short piece of the first problem. It says, I was captured by a band of outlaws, so said a famous explorer anyways, and their leader had my hands and legs tied up so I could not move. They did not gag me though, and I could use my mouth freely. The leader of the gang hung a piece of bread exactly 5 centimeters away from my mouth. Then he laughed and said, if you manage to eat this piece of bread, I'll set you free. And he knew I could get no help. Also, in order to ensure that I cannot roll over or move closer to the bread, they tied me to a tree. But nevertheless, I managed to free myself. How did I do that? And the kids would, of
Mm.
course, go, yeah, like, no way. But he said every
Right.
single week they got a little better. They opened another door, opened another door, opened another door, until pretty soon they started collaborating and stuff. And then they started doing a little friendly competition and collaborating. So, what happened to that group of kids that took one class in hard creative work that was just incredibly hard? Well, to start off, they put all the kids at both schools through 28 different tests of intelligence because they wanted it a wide range. Secondly,
Mm.
when they were retested 3 years later, the group that took the hard challenges, 1 hour a week. Let me wrap your head around it. 1 hour a week. Their group showed an average IQ of 15 points higher than the control group.
Oh, wow.
This is what kids can do if you do one thing right.
I have a question. What do you think when it comes to like being or moving during learning and before learning or after learning? Is there differences or value? So, for example, I believe that there's a good amount of research to support that when you do some aerobic activity before learning, it's going to enhance, right? But is there a difference between moving while learning? that maybe, for example, I don't know, I'm walking and listening to a podcast versus, just sitting in a classroom?
The short answer is if it's synced up with the learning, yes.
Right.
In
Right.
other words, uh, otherwise you're getting your brain's kind of you're asking it to
Get
pick one.
distracted.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's too hard for you to do that. So you theoretically could have students do nothing beforehand, but after a couple of minutes they stand up and they just take a short walk, and you might be playing a consolidation of learning while they walk, and then you push stop, and then you say, find a partner. You got 10 seconds to find either one or two partners, ready to go. And in 10 seconds, while they're standing in place or walking in place, what have you learned so far? And what are you
Mm.
curious about next?
So it sounds like right before learning or as a movement break could be the most valuable.
It's the
Yeah.
most valuable. The ones in the middle, it's just a little harder to create and establish. I won't say they're
Right.
bad. I'll just say harder to set up. So
I
if
would think, yeah. So I was just going to say, I would think also it would differentiate between memorizing and creativity. Like, for example, if I want to brainstorm, maybe going for a walk could be good. Whereas if I'm trying to memorize, I might need to just close everything off and just focus in on that thing. So, like, if I'm memorizing, movement might be better before. Whereas maybe if I'm doing something creative, depending on what that thing is, but maybe creative scenarios might lend themselves to walking or something like that a little more.
I think you're right about that. I'll just say there are a lot of different scenarios. When I was
Right.
putting
Yeah.
on brain expos, where I invited really well-known, amazing scientists to come speak to teachers and speak layperson language. And one of them was
Mm.
Dr. Terry Sanowski, who I met him at the Salk Institute in La Jolla of neurobiological studies. And so we were taking a walk one day, and I said to him, Dr. Sanowski, what do you suggest for teachers? What ideally could they do to be better at teaching? And we were taking a walk, and he said, I teach undergrads. Here's what I do. I give them a short bit of information. I ask them to go take a walk with one or two others and just talk it over while they walk. So you're to your
Mm.
point, if they have some background information on it, then going for a walk can work. But if they were
Mm.
just completely out of the blue and they knew nothing, it wouldn't work. They'd be kind of like, I didn't understand anything he was saying.
Right.
So
Yeah, it makes
you
sense.
gotta be the one that's just careful about it. When done well, like if you feel like if they already did that at their desks, talked it over, then you could say, get up, take a walk, and you can talk about anything you want except what we just learned. And now the kids are
Mm.
going, whoa.
Right.
Now you
Right.
can create some social bonds, social glue.
Right.
It's all good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So we hit on a lot of good stuff. We're almost coming to a close. So there's just one or two other questions here. One of the other big ones was, are there any new significant updates or changes? I know you wrote your book. Since you wrote your book, I don't know if you're writing another one, but if you were to plan to write another one, are there any new things that you think would be important to address since your last one?
I think the answer is yes. I never
Mm.
stopped learning. Compared to 10 years ago, I feel like I was an idiot then. Like I didn't know what I was talking about. But I could say that every 10 years, really.
Mm. Mm.
So new stuffs. Uh, Remember earlier I talked about your five exterior senses and then your interior senses. They say what that is now telling us is that things like heart condition, depression, those are as much mental as they are physical. In other words, your body's not right when in fact, if you're depressed, people are giving you drugs to do something to work on your brain, which of course is missing the core cause of it. So
Mm.
same thing with, cardio function. People treat the heart when in fact the brain is the one that's running it.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
never saw the intensity and with clarity about the body mind being as tight as it is. In
Mm.
addition to that, I used to feel like we had five or six or seven hardwired emotions. Now I'm thinking maybe we do early on, but the rest of them get added on through these combinations. Dr. Paul Ekman was the one that promoted we have some core emotions, but Dr. Lisa Barrett, she was the one that said that we construct these on the spot. Like every
Mm,
emotion, it gets whipped together by our mind, brain, body. And now I can see how that might come about when you've got exterior and interior working together and they create an emotion that you didn't even have a name for. Because initially,
right,
everything's new. So emotions are way more complex and harder than I ever thought. Just as the
right.
body physically, the book I'm writing right now is called Thrive. I'm almost done with it. And the book on it
Very
is
cool.
integrating all of these pieces together. Like, how do you
Mm.
get your body and mind and emotions to work all together at the same time? That's the book.
That's funny. That's where my head is at a lot of times nowadays. I think I'll be writing a book myself, and if I do, the title I'm leaning towards is Beyond Fitness: A Holistic Approach to Exercise. And it's the idea of incorporating mind, body, and spirit. Like, fitness, we look at ourselves as being very robotic. Like, we can't really treat ourselves as a machine. Like, we're more than just a machine. We are the mind, and we are the spirit and the emotions as well. And I think all things in life, whether you're thinking about learning, whether you're thinking about fitness, no matter what, if we are all three things. In the richest experiences, the best learning experiences, the best performances are usually when all three of those things are at their highest peak. You can't really just lift one without the other, and you can't not consider all three. Are people motivated? Are they excited? Do they feel confident? Are they invested? That's my spirit. My mind, am I stimulated? Am I intellectually stimulated? Am I learning new things? Am I strategizing? Is it more than just being, for example, very robotic on that treadmill? It's this rich, rich, rich experience. And then the body needs to be involved too, because those are the senses. That's what kind of gives us the feeling that enhances the spirit as well. Like, I just see it again and again that whether you're trying to learn or whether you're trying to learn at your best or perform at your best or do anything at your best, all three have to be integrated. Um,
Absolutely. And the only way that humans can survive is that integration. We
mm,
are out of balance and less likely to survive. And we can tell that by mortality rates. They're higher for people with depression, higher for people with cardiovascular issues, higher for people, obviously, with dementia. But many of those things can be
mm,
mitigated by simple things like, do you walk, 5,000 steps a day, or do you work out? Do you like all of those things? Unless they working together, your chances of living a long life, they just drop a little bit. Nobody's going
mm,
to tell you you're going to die tomorrow if you don't exercise, but I do that every day of the week. Why?
mm.
Just because I feel better. I'm literally happier when I do that. And that's a good way to go
Yeah.
through your life.
One thing, yeah, that's great. And I also think about when I'm prescribing fitness nowadays to people, I also think about not just, the fitness side, like, how intense can you move and how long can you move, but also how can you stimulate your brain while you're doing it? Can you, for example, if you're rock climbing, you have to figure out how to get up. What's the best way to get up this wall? You have to strategize a bit. If you're playing a game of soccer, I have to strategize with my team. There's a dynamic environment. Anytime the environment becomes more dynamic, you have to strategize and plan and learn. And when you incorporate that with movement, you just notice that the benefits become more robust. It's better for dementia. It's better for Alzheimer's. It's better for all these other issues as well. So I usually try to advocate for people to do more than just, for example, like cardio kickboxing, but instead invest in a martial art where you're actually going to learn the new techniques, maybe even compete with it. Maybe like, it has this whole experience tied to it, but you're stimulating the mind and you're stimulating learning and all these other things as well.
Yeah, you're right on target. I think there are some new books coming out that are starting to piece that puzzle together. So you're on the right path. I look forward to someday being able to read your book
Oh,
and
I
get a
appreciate
signed
that.
copy.
Oh my, I'd be humbled by that. I appreciate that. Um, but yeah, we're right at our time here. Before we start to come to a close, are there any last things you want to share? Not that you have to, but just in case we missed anything.
I think we hit all the key buttons, and I'm hoping everyone stays in a state of remembering that the whole point that your brain is on sitting on top of your shoulders, your head and your brain is sitting there, is to keep you alive. And you
Mm,
keep yourself alive with a clear mind, with a healthy body, and a soul and a heart that goes with it. And you can't just expect yourself to work without you working too. So
mm.
make that a priority of taking care of yourself, and things will be better in the long run. So thank you for the opportunity of being here. And you guys have a mobile week.
Yes, exactly. That was a wonderful close. So thank you for being on here as well. I'm gonna close out this recording.